Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out to our panel. So we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion in the Kubernetes community today. And I had the opportunity to watch Kelsey Hightower's keynote last night. Hopefully all of you saw it as well. So I thought he gave us the perfect opening to this discussion today. And it's clear that he feels included and part of the community. But as the community is growing and changing, we have to continue to ensure that the people that are here can continue to participate, and we can invite more folks into the community and ensure they feel included and able to participate. And so that's the topic of our panel today. So I would love it if each of our panelists could quickly introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about how you're involved in the community. So Jemma, you want to start?
Hi, I'm Jemma Bolland. I'm the COO of the Scale Factory. We are a cloud infrastructure consultancy based out of London. Half of our engineers are CKAs, and so we are part of the CNCF community.
Perfect. Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Stewart. I am CTO of my couch because I'm currently on sabbatical. But I was previously VP of Platform Engineering at Fastly. And before that, VP of Engineering at Heptio, which was acquired by VMware. And that's where I got most engaged with the Kubernetes community.
Awesome. Lara?
Good morning, I'm Lara Owen. I'm the Director of Global Workplace Experience for GitHub. We are 1,100 people in 21 countries, and part of my responsibility is to build community both locally in our offices and remotely and virtually around the world. Kubernetes is a huge repo on our open source platform with 2,300 contributors and over 86,000 commits. So there's a lot of lessons that we've learned between how we run our company and how our platform operates. And I'm excited to share them here today.
Perfect. All right, Kevin, we'll start with you. So how do you think the Kubernetes community, what do you think the Kubernetes community has done to be welcoming to underrepresented groups? And what do you think that we've missed the boat on here?
So I think the main thing with the Kubernetes community is that the early founders placed a very high premium on inclusiveness, diversity, collaboration. So a lot of the attributes of the community were baked in from the very start. My experience with the community has always been almost exclusively a positive one. I've watched people come into the community who knew nothing about Kubernetes, nothing about cloud native, and see other members of the community try to help them out, get them started if they're unclear about how to contribute. If they wanted to get a job, people would point out the different companies that were hiring and that would be a good fit for them. So I think just from the way the community started, we started with the right intent. We started inclusiveness from the start, and that's just grown over time. It's hard for me to say, what we've missed the boat on, because that almost assumes that there's a perfect end state, which there isn't. We're always going to mess something up at some point, but I think where we've done the best is the community as a whole is always trying. We're always listening to others when a problem arises. We're always responding as things come up. And a perfect example is actually something that led up to this event that I was actually involved in. There was a dispute on Twitter, because Twitter, that involved a woman making some comments, sort of trying to tone police others, and people sort of jumped on her about that. Then a friend of hers sort of jumped on them, trying to white knight the situation, which led to others sort of piling on, and in turn, a person that was a friend of the original white knight started making some videos and tweeting about why this was unfair, even though what his friend said was wrong. And turns out this person was going to come to KubeCon. And I'm a grown man. I'm not put off by people I disagree with being in the same place that I am. But I wondered whether others would feel the same, or even feel like they could speak up about this person that was causing a lot of harm over the weeks that this incident was going on. And I just said, hey, I'm not sure I would even want to come to KubeCon if this person's in attendance. And so many members of the community reached out to me, either publicly or privately. Folks on the program committee reached out and said, hey, what would you do with this person? And actually sought my advice on it, and I gave it, and they actually followed up on it. And that person was banned from coming to KubeCon because they decided that they violated the code of conduct and that they were tone policing. And it's that sort of responsiveness, even in the smallest areas, that shows me that this is a strong community and that they really have each other's back. And I think our job is really to maintain that as the community grows.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. The CNCF has a really strong code of conduct around Kubernetes and attending the conference, and they took it very seriously and reviewed that incident and reacted. So that's a really great story. All right, so Jemma, what do you think we can do to allow for more folks from underrepresented groups to join the Kubernetes community?
I think the community does so many great things, but I think the barriers to entry are still very high. I think the knowledge isn't very equally shared. So I think the main thing we can do is champion people, to actively invite them in, to create space and hold space for them, and not wait for them to come to us, but maybe go out and offer help and offer that leg up. I wouldn't be sitting here if somebody hadn't opened a door for me and held it open and given me the space to learn. And I think that we can all do that for other people in some way. So on whatever scale you can do that, now you're here, use that advantage to help other people up.
Yeah, that's great. And I know there's a number of talks here and tracks and blog posts and a lot of things where folks who are in the community are reaching out to help others join and learn and get up to speed. So I would encourage everyone to seek those out. So Laura, let's move on a little bit to open source as a whole. Mm-hmm. What do you think are some systemic concerns that make it difficult for underrepresented groups to contribute to open source?
Yeah, so I guess where do I start on this one? There are a lot of systemic issues, from barrier to entry, racism, sexism, so on and so forth, that can limit inclusion, both in the workplace and on open source, in open source communities. I think from my perspective, and I accept this coming from a very privileged place, but as my background in environmental creation, one of the things we can do is create communities where we don't put the onus on the marginalized or the underrepresented group, but we create environments where the default is inclusion and the default is being a citizen instead of just an occupant or a participant. And GitHub has built some different features and tools to help people do that on our platform. One of them is explicit consent. Just like on Facebook, where you have to accept a friend request, you can also, you have to accept being invited to a repo. This has decreased the incidents where we had people get invited to repos that have racist or malicious content of some sort, and they somehow get associated with that simply because they were added. Other things we've done include creating a sponsorship program. We have a lot of maintainers on our platform that contribute a huge amount of time and effort to ensuring that our communities are functioning properly, but they don't get paid for this work. And you know, there may be the trope that engineers are all well paid and have a ton of time to do this kind of work, but a lot of them aren't. So we wanted to make sure that regardless of your financial situation, you were rewarded and appreciated. So we just rolled out last week at Universe that now teams can do this. So teams that are working on projects that you like or that you have utilized, I encourage you to go sponsor them and show your appreciation for them.
That's awesome. Kevin, any comments on that?
No, I think it's pretty much covered. How do I follow that?
I know, right? Or any other systemic concerns you think just prevent folks from participating?
I think there's a certain fear factor based on scale and context. So obviously our community is fairly large. Kubernetes is a large project. There are a lot of large projects that are part of the CNCF, so new folks may feel a bit intimidated of like, how do I even begin to get engaged in there? So in terms of like things that we can start looking at doing better is just understanding the scale of the community that we have and realizing that not everybody's going to feel as comfortable engaging. And we should be looking at mechanisms to how to reduce that scale for folks. So taking Kubernetes, for example, we have a lot of different audiences that are interested in that platform, but developers are different from operators. Operators who are familiar with Unix are not the same as operators who are familiar with Windows, and we just rolled out a bunch of features that were targeted at Windows users. So taking into consideration the context that people are coming from and seeing how do we approach those folks to engage them and bring them in is, I think, the next step of what we can start doing versus just sort of the, hey, we're welcoming, everybody come in. We have to do a little bit more to help bring them in and ease them in a way that respects where they're coming from.
Yeah, and I was actually at a talk yesterday, which I thought was really interesting. The scale of the project is so large, but it's divided up into so many subgroups that it becomes really dependent on 4 or 5 people that are fixing bugs, before a release. So there's a huge scale, but small groups of people really showing up and contributing to the project. And so I think newcomers should just understand that showing up to the community, being dependable, being reliable is a way that you can easily contribute and be part of something really big and scalable. Yeah. Okay, so Jemma, I'd love to start with you on this question, but how do you think the idea of meritocracy that's built into many open source communities either hurts or helps the ability for diverse ideas and perspectives to be heard?
I think the problem with meritocracy is that it assumes a level playing field, which is just not the case. Yeah. So if you've had the opportunity, the educational opportunities, you have the spare time to contribute to open source because you're not working a second job, then you may appear to have merit when actually what you have is privilege. So I think that we should focus on leveling that playing field rather than calling it meritocracy when it isn't.
Kevin?
Promise I'd be good. I promise I'd be good. The problem with meritocracy is that it doesn't exist. There's no such thing. I think Kara Swisher said it best. It's more of a meritocracy, that it reflects the privilege of the people that sort of put those barriers in front. And when I first got involved with open source, it was all about meritocracy. It's all about your contributions, except when it didn't actually match the expectations of the people setting that particular bar. Mm-hmm. So I think the whole idea of meritocracy in open source has been disproved for a while now, even though it keeps resurfacing, because some people desperately want it to be a particular way, and they don't recognize that other people are going to have different points of view, different things that are important to them that they want to bring to the table. So trying to use meritocracy as a filter is really just a way of gatekeeping.
Laura, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think just to dogpile
Please.
on that. There have been studies done on GitHub where female contributors, their commits are accepted more often than male contributors unless their gender is easily identified. These biases come in really quickly, and even though people are aware of them, awareness does not equal action. So I think when it comes to meritocracy, all those biases that have been mentioned before come into play, and yeah, I think it's moot at this point. I'm hopefully more people in agreement, and there's less usage of that word.
Yeah, and I think even companies are focusing a little bit on this and maybe not using the same language in terms of, hey, we let everyone at the table have an opportunity to speak. We don't speak over each other. But I think that a lot of people are missing the point that not everyone's actually at the table to speak, and we have to continue to focus on that as our goal. Okay, Jemma. What do you think some companies are doing to support diversity and inclusion in the Kubernetes community?
Speaking for the Scale Factory, we're small, we're only 22 people, so we face a different set of issues than maybe a bigger company like GitHub. But what we do is that we prioritize learning across the board. So last year we had a reading week, a Kubernetes reading week, where everyone could stop their normal work and just learn. And that gave people who might not have had the opportunity to play with the new shiny bits of the tech to actually get in there, get their hands dirty, and really kind of progress. Other than that, flexibility. I think giving people flexibility makes diversity among the team better. It gives people the time, the space they need to kind of get into their stride.
Yeah, we were just having a conversation before this panel around policies at companies on flexible work, and the more that we can make that playing field even, everyone gets an opportunity to work where they want when they need to. That provides an opportunity for more people to participate in companies and in the community.
But if I throw something in on that?
Please.
Since, again, I'm not working for any companies, but I will talk about a company I used to work with Shanis, before it got acquired. One of the things that we really focused on in terms of helping to grow the community, since that was actually one of our corporate goals, is how do we expand the Kubernetes community, is to get over this whole over-focus on senior people. I think everyone's, any startup that comes up, everyone's immediately looking, I want senior engineers, I want senior this, I want senior that. We have to start looking at more people for interest and potential. Everybody can learn. Like this is, yes, it's complex. Yes, there's a lot to a lot of cloud native stuff, but everyone has the capacity to learn. And I'm way more interested in folks that show that they have an interest, that they, want to learn. I'd rather invest the time in that rather than folks who already know they're good and have already accomplished a ton of stuff. I mean, you need those people too, but I think we've skewed things so much that we're only looking for those senior folks and not looking to invest and grow in others. And the more that companies adopt that approach, I think the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to the heart of diversity. You have people who think they've been there, done that for a long time. It can create a fixed mindset. You have new folks who look at it differently. Then you get new and different ideas, and that makes everything better. Okay, Laura, so I think one really important thing is that both technical and non-technical leadership is seen and appreciated, not only in the Kubernetes community, but in companies. And I would love to just understand how you've seen this work at GitHub, or for, and ideas for the community to ensure that both of those skill sets are recognized and appreciated.
Yeah. So when I started at GitHub 6 years ago, we didn't have IT, HR, sales. We had a bunch of engineers and a few basic G&A folks. And when I came on, I was like, we probably should hire IT. And was told, if you don't know how to fix your computer, you probably shouldn't work for a tech company, carte blanche. And I told them, well, if you don't know how to do payroll, you should probably be working for free. We got IT.
Yes, that's awesome.
And the idea that, you can build a company just with technical people, is a fallacy. We now have HR, we now have sales, we now have, a bigger finance team, an amazing IT team. And you really have to look at your community in a holistic way. Everybody's bringing a different skill set, contributing something else. And to really build a successful, diverse company, diversity comes from seniority, from age, from race, from, all kinds of different things. One of the good things about GitHub is that both our technical and our non-technical people use GitHub to collaborate. So for instance, my team is opening a new office. We're looking at New York. As we do the design, we share it in a repo in GitHub, and people are allowed to comment, contribute, make changes, ask questions, express concerns through the whole process. And that helps me when I go look at what our engineers are doing. I understand the tools they're using. So our entire leadership team, both technical and non-technical, and everybody below them are all working on the same platform. We can speak the same languages, even if it all isn't code, but we understand how to work together. I think another thing we do, which is probably really important for the open source community, is learning how to work remotely. There are different ways you hold meetings if people are on video conferencing, or if you're in an open source repo, than if everybody's in the room together. And we spent a ton of time doing manager training, teaching people different tactics and tools that they can use to be successful when you're communicating across different mediums and platforms. In addition, we have a really cool feature that I love. It's collaboration. It's like a pause button. So maintainers can essentially, if things start getting heated within a repo, if people are not communicating well or somebody's trolling, they can put the pause button on that person for 24 hours. People can step away. So it gives you that in-person experience of hey, this is getting a little too much, let's take a break and then come back to it when we're a little bit calm. And I really love that idea that what we learn in the real world can be taken online and vice versa.
Yeah, and Kevin, I'd love to hear from you as a technical leader. How do you build that appreciation for non-technical leadership, or even different types of technical depth, The term technical is so broad and can be used to make people feel wrong a lot of times. If you're not an infrastructure engineer, you're not technical enough. So how do you build that sort of appreciation and understanding into technical teams that you work on?
I think one key is to just stop using the terminology like non-technical. It's weird because, what exactly is technical? Just because you're not writing code doesn't mean you don't understand technology, that you don't work with technology. And I think the whole calling someone non-technical is just, again, another form of gatekeeping. We're this protected class, this hierarchy, and if you're not doing the things we're doing, you're not one of us. To be frank, that's a lot of bull. We also have to work with engineering teams to make sure that they understand that the code isn't everything. If you're working as part of a business, yes, the code is maybe important. It's probably the majority of where the revenue is coming from, but you can't do it alone. I need to work with sales folks and marketing folks and designers and product managers to make that final product that actually generates the revenue. So trying to act as if the only work that's important is the work that's being done in engineering, you're just fooling yourself. So I see that a large part of my role as an engineering leader is sort of bringing that appreciation for all the other roles to engineering, inviting folks in, making sure that we have lots of cross-functional interactions, and making sure that everyone treats everyone else with respect no matter what their role is. And most people get it. There are times that you have to elbow somebody and say, hey, that's not cool. Their work is just as important as yours. But we really have to start thinking more about the words that we use, thinking about how we interact with others in the company and not create these siloed interactions that are some historical traits in software companies.
Yeah. Jemma?
I can add to that,
yeah. Please.
So I think siloing is the main issue. If you aren't all pulling in the same direction, so if the technical team we are technical, we work to different rules, then you can end up with a lack of cohesion and a lack of direction. And one of the things that I think some companies don't do well is combining those skills for the greater good. So I think that if the technical team are off doing something over here, they might not have the context of the sales team or the marketing team, and that just ends up with conflict. It ends up with kind of blame culture and all of those things. So I think bringing everyone together and removing the labels. Everyone is technical if they work in a tech business. Basically making sure we're all working to the same plan.
Sometimes it's something as simple as having the engineering team rotate on writing a blog post for the website. And that way they have to work with the marketing team and just forcing those little interactions where then the marketing team gets exposed to engineering and maybe understands the concept a little bit better just through the process of writing a blog post. Create those natural interactions and start removing those barriers.
Yeah, and I think the more that leadership teams can ensure everyone understands how the business functions, how we make money, how we pay payroll, all of those things, and not allow people to just focus on, I'm an engineer, so that's all I care about, then it really gives much more respect for the scale and the expertise across companies. Okay, so Kevin, what are some other projects that we can learn from the Kubernetes point of view?
So that's a difficult question to answer because, again, that whole issue of scale, if you were to look across the open source community, probably Linux is the only equivalent project to something like Kubernetes. And since Linux predates Kubernetes, I'm not going to say anything bad about the Linux community, but I'm not saying there's a lot of stuff I pull from how they're organized. They've had their challenges. And I think even with some of the newer open source projects, a lot of them look towards our community and pull ideas from. One example that I can think of recently is with the Go community. They recently launched a new developer resource at go.dev because they recognize, as I was mentioning earlier, that there are different contexts that people have when they're coming into a community. And the original golang.org site was really about the open source project and development and very technical. And they needed another resource for folks that were just coming in like, well, what is Go? Why would I use this programming language? Who's using it? As decision makers, people want to see, well, who else is doing something similar to us? And they created this go.dev site that answers a lot of those questions targeted at that group of people. So I think that's a technique we can use to help deal with the developers versus operators versus decision makers. But as a whole, I can't point at another whole community and say, they're really knocking it out of the park, we should copy that. I'd more reinforce, hey, we're doing a lot of things right, so let's keep doing that, and don't get complacent with our current position and start letting things degrade as the community grows.
Yeah. And Jemma, I'm curious, how did you get started in the Kubernetes community, and what do you think are resources for other folks to get up and running?
So I came sideways from kind of various other businesses into tech. And so that was a very kind of nerve-wracking experience, because I was the first non-technical, without using that word, I was the first non-engineer hire at the Scale Factory. I was the 9th employee, and I was the first person who was there to oversee things. There were 2 directors, so they were both engineers, but they were handling things like payroll and finance and all those other things between them. So I came on and started to look at how we could build culture as we grew. We've gone from 9 people to 22 in the last 3.5 years. And so, and learning to communicate about the tech without actually understanding the code or how to do it, and understanding what I can do to support the team, to help them do what they do better, and they understand that I might not know the nuts and bolts of what they're doing, but I am there every step of the way to make sure that their life is good, and that's inside and outside work, and that I will do everything I can to make them be able to achieve as much as they can.
That's awesome. And so the panelists haven't seen this question before, but I'm going to throw it in. Yeah, just throwing a little wrench in. Because a lot of leaders ask this question to me, what's like something I can do every day to, affect diversity and inclusion in my company? And so I would love to hear what are 1 or 2 kind of everyday actions you think folks in the community, folks in their company can do to ensure that they're keeping these topics top of mind. So, Laura?
Yep. One of my favorite things to do is simply to reach out. Again, putting the onus on marginalized and underrepresented communities to have to find someone to listen to them isn't fair. From the workplace team, I love reaching out to be like, what's working in the office? What's not working in the office? I don't think I'm going to solve all the systemic and institutionalized problems that we have in tech, but letting someone know that they're appreciated and heard is just a really easy way to make your community a little bit stronger. And then I think also having a growth mindset. You don't know what you don't know, and learning about other people. People are fascinating. I love meeting new people, and you never know who's going to be your new best friend. So I think those are my 2 things.
That's awesome. Kevin?
I'd say be mindful of how much you're focusing on any one area. I think it's an easy trap to, be passionate about diversity and inclusion, but then over-focus on one particular approach, whether it's, trying to get more women into your company or into the community, or, providing scholarships or whatever. There's no one solution to rule them all. And if you're not paying attention to the whole expanse of things, you're most likely going to create a situation where people end up feeling excluded. I've been in that situation where, I hear diversity, diversity, diversity. And the reality is, no offense to my wonderful panel here, diversity meant white women. It did not include me. So I think it's a trap that leaders fall into pretty easily. And you just have to be mindful of that diversity is broader than that, and inclusion really means that it's as comfortable for me as it is for you, as it is for everyone in this room. And if you're focusing on any one area, you're definitely creating an environment where people are going to feel excluded.
That's a great point. Jemma?
I think stating intent is really important. So if you're talking about wanting to be inclusive, ask people, are we being inclusive? Do our actions stand up to our intention? If you state your intention often and you invite feedback on whether you're actually achieving it, you'll actually get much better feedback than if you just kind of check in with yourself and think, hey, I'm doing this, a great job. The other thing is be very aware of intersectionality. It's not just race, it's not just gender. There's neuroatypicality, there is physical ability, there are people whose lives are just vastly different for any given reason, whether that's class, whether that's religion. Be very aware of intersectionality. This isn't Pokemon. You can't just tick boxes and say, hey, I've got my number of women and I've got my number of diverse people that I can see, so therefore I'm doing well.
I'm
Be
so
aware.
using that. This isn't Pokemon. I'm stealing it.
I love it. Yeah, we have time for questions, so please. Do we have a mic for questions, or do we just need to? Okay, I'll repeat it.
I'm a pretty loud guy, so I'd actually like to follow up. You hit on exactly one of my points. So generally, when we say diversity and inclusion, frankly speaking, what we mean is sexual orientation, gender, and ethnicity. We aren't talking about disability inclusion. And I'm trying to, so that's one of my bandwagons that I push into work. But look around. How many mobility impaired people do you see here? How many hearing impaired people do you see here? How many vision impaired people do you see here? How many other disabilities do you see here? We don't even have a disability engaged conference. There's no closed captioning. There's no sense of, do we have mobility preferred seating for people who need it? And I'd love to hear your ideas on how we can drive that to be part of our diversity and inclusion, because it's very much an underrepresented minority. Look around. My daughter is vision impaired, so I'm pretty passionate about it. I had a conversation with one vision impaired individual I met yesterday, who, in that conversation, I can tell he felt like a very singled out minority, and he's almost a point of entertainment because he walks around with a mobility cane. And when I first approached him, he didn't want to talk. When he heard that my daughter has the same genetic eye condition he did, then he engaged me. But his response was one of closing off because of how he's treated in this environment. I'd love to hear your suggestions and ideas. I'd love to bring this to CNCF and others to open this up. I know Dan Cohn tried doing closed captioning at the Shanghai event. I don't know if he did it in the keynotes here or not, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you. And just so everyone, I'm not sure if you heard that in the back, but he's talking about mobility, disability, and how we can engage disabled folks in the conference. So I don't know, panelists, do you have any feedback? I think, yeah, we just have to do better. That's my feedback. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
So I'm involved in DevOps Days London, and we, as standard, have closed captioning, we have signing. I think the thing that's really important is having these things there, and not, I've seen other conferences where they say, hey, if you have any needs, come find us and we will do this for you. That's not good enough. We need to have it available, even if nobody's using it, because if it's there, maybe the second or third year. Same thing happens with childcare. We had childcare a couple of years, no children in the childcare. But you know what, the third year and the fourth year, suddenly they're there. So you have to have those things available, and then things will come. And yeah, don't expect people to come to you and say, hey, I've got a problem.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, it has to be the default, not the rule. At GitHub, we've definitely started looking into how do we make our offices more accessible? Can you open all the doors and get through the office if you're in a wheelchair, if you're on crutches? Not all disabilities are permanent, some are temporary. Many are not visible. I think we have 1/5 of our population is colorblind, so do we use red in any of our signage? These are things we have to think of as we help people navigate the space, and the only way to do it is to have conversations with those impacted, and to reach out to lots of nonprofit groups that are interested in doing this work and advancing this cause, so thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah. Thank you. Hi.
Hi. So I'm curious to know if any, or what can be done, or what you all do to increase interest in diversity. Marginalized groups are usually the ones that go to diversity events, and there's 8,000 people here, and this room is small and not full. So is there anything that you do to increase interest in diversity? I'm sure we've all heard of this. If we're all part of a marginalized group, the people that aren't in marginalized groups should be the ones really hearing this, learning about diversity. How to increase that interest?
Okay, just so if everyone didn't hear the question, so the question is, how do you actually increase interest in diversity and inclusion topics outside of the folks in marginalized groups who are showing up to talks like this? How do you get the majority to be interested? And so what are some ways the panel has ideas there? So I know somebody wants to start, Kevin?
I'm conflicted with this because I've spent so much time trying to push for diversity, push for inclusion, and after a while you kind of get tired when you're saying the same things over and over again, and the folks that have the most ability to make change have no real incentive to do so. So it's like, all right, do I just keep pounding the drum, banging on it, or do I just focus my energies where it makes the most sense? So, you know, I care a lot about seeing more Black and brown people on stages like this. Like Brian Lowell is a friend of mine. Kelsey Hightower is a friend of mine. I'm happy to see them up on the keynotes. But I'd like to see Troy Connor up on that stage. I'd like to see a bunch of folks that I don't know that look like me and that share the same background doing that. So I spend more of my time more talking to those folks and trying to, you know, encourage them to do the things that need to be done because again, they felt like, you know, I'm not in a position where I can do these things and invest my energies there. At this point, you know, for as long as we've been banging the diversity and inclusion drum, I'm just gonna go on the assumption that, sorry, white people, y'all know that there's a problem and that you're the ones that have to make that change. So I'm not gonna spend all my time trying to talk to you about that. I'm just gonna judge your actions. If you're actually doing the work, I will support you, I will help you. If I have to still convince you, I ain't got time for that.
Yeah, hi in the red shirt. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so two very quick comments and then a question. First of all, this panel is a great step forward because last year every panel that had the D word name in it was 100% women and even devolved into, at least one of them devolved into very important issues, but a focus on working mommy issues that were even outside the scope of a lot of the women in the room. So thank you for the high level. And thank you for adding, even though it was at the last minute, the issues of disability and neurodiversity, which are, neurodiversity I think is a big fact of life in anywhere in, you know, disproportionately in technology. And yet we tend to treat it as an impediment and a problem and how bad can it get instead of looking at contributors and making a combination. Moving on. What sort of steps do you take in the interview and hiring process to remove bias and remove the sameness idea?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so at GitHub, we remove names, we remove zip codes, we remove college degrees from applications from the initial recruiter screen to remove any biases. Once you get people in the door, it's a little more challenging. Once you get people face to face, we're gonna make biases, but we standardize a lot of the processes and we ensure that people ask the same questions. So it's not just a free flow conversation and I like that person, I wanna grab a beer with them, I didn't like that person. It's, I can compare these same 3 questions and see which ones rank appropriately.
Yeah, and at VMware, we have each interview panelist has a specific area they're focusing on with standardized questions, and they meet as a group before and after to get a diverse set of opinions on the person they interviewed. And then we also standardize how long we will have folks at an interview. So we never ask somebody to come in for 75 interviews like some companies do. It's like 6 interviews, that's the end, you make a decision, and we really standardize that process.
Actually, a quick follow-up. How do you deal with things that are traditional head scratchers in evaluating a resume? For example, in the LGBTQI+ panel last year, we had a trans person in the group who called out the fact that they had trouble with resume gaps because of transitioning time frame. So, you know, how do you eliminate that kind of bias? The timeline looks weird, change of positions look odd. How do you get people over those things?
I've personally, you know, talk to my interviewers and my recruiters and sort of de-emphasize the whole gap thing. Like, there are tons of valid reasons why people have gaps in their resumes now, and the old sort of thinking of, oh, there's so much time between jobs, something must be wrong. It's just outmoded thinking. And so we've had those conversations before we started sourcing and interviewing folks to sort of dispel that. Thing I've personally done is I just inject myself at the beginning of the process. I'm involved in sourcing, I'm involved with the first set of interviews to try and reduce that bias before we get down the chain. Because a lot of times that's always the problem, is that things get filtered out so early in the process that by the time you're actually dealing with the actual interview, you've already lost out on a lot of wonderful potential candidates.
Yeah, it comes down to education at the manager level, every hiring manager, and that's what we focus on at VMware as well. I think one more question. Yeah, hi in the gray. Hi.
As an autistic person attending this con, I can say that it's been a nightmare, sensory-wise. With loud music and bright lights and crowds and flashy things. I could go on, but I don't want to waste my time. So, with, obviously, everywhere I go, this con, they're the same. So how, as someone who already is very nervous and talks to people, how do we reach out to people who matter to say, hey, this is a con?
Thank you. Thank you for speaking up. I appreciate it.
Well, you just reached out to all of us,
Yes.
so
Thank you.
we're happy to carry that message on for you. And you don't always have to feel like you have to make a big public statement. If you find one person you feel confident to talk to, say, hey, this is my experience at this. And I think especially in this community, people are more likely to act on it and talk to the appropriate folks. And just again, being brave enough to make that statement here, I guarantee at least half a dozen folks will be talking to some of the organizers. I promise you I will do it, since I know one of the co-chairs. I'll have that conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming. We really appreciate your participation.
Thank you.